Hello class, welcome to week 5. This is developing written tests and surveys. This is chapter 8 in your Morrow textbook. So this week we're talking about tests and surveys, and the first thing you probably have in mind is like, what do we need to know this for? So when will we need to develop a written test or survey? This whole time we've been talking about creating a research project. We haven't really touched on the subject of creating tests or surveys or any type of questionnaire. So how is this applicable when you're trying to determine if let's say you're a researcher or you're a physical educator, have met the objective of increasing participant knowledge. So if your goal is to teach people, to instruct people, then you want to know if what you're teaching is being taught, if they're learning it. So through tests and surveys is a good way to figure that out. I'm going to skip ahead in the slides here. I'm not going to go through all of them. This is going to be a short video. I just want to go over some of the main topics that I feel like most important. So again, we must consider validity and reliability when we're talking about tests and surveys. We must consider that our research tool should be valid and reliable. In this case, our research tool are these tests and surveys that we're going to be developing. So one important point to note here, and you might read this in your book, is that in normal research we usually use test, retest form of reliability, but when writing a test, you really can't use that, because your first exam, so the first time someone takes an exam, is going to affect the score of the second exam, because they're already going to see the answers, or I'm sorry, they're going to see the questions for a second time, so that's going to affect how they answer the second time. They have a better idea of how to answer that second time. Another point to consider is that when looking over tests, a test that has more questions by nature would be more reliable if you add more questions to it. So a test that only has 5 questions compared to a test that has 100 questions would be less reliable. And that's only because of chance. There is a chance, or I'm sorry, by luck. If your student, let's say you assume they're going to be answering some of these questions by just guessing, then they have a better chance of guessing more correct answers if there's only 5 of them compared to if there's 100 of them. It would take more skill to answer more correct questions on a 100-question test than it would on a 5-question test. Now with each test, there's always going to be a source of error. In your book, pages 172 and 173, it lists several sources of error. For example, inadequate sampling, an examinee's mental and physical condition, and environmental conditions, and there's a few more. But we have to consider these sources of error, and we have to account for them. So you have the Kuder-Richardson Formula 20 and the KR21 as well. So there's 2 formulas on page 173, and these will give you a reliability coefficient. So here's the formula for the KR20 and the KR21, and it says so for the KR21, it says when all test questions have equal difficulty and equal discrimination, the KR21 is used. So the KR21 is the more conservative of both equations. And in the book it explains that you want to be as conservative as possible. You want to not overestimate how reliable your test is. Next we move on to validity. And in validity, one of the most important types, like it's stated here, is content validity. But if you're just looking at a test in general and you were given one piece of information, any coefficient of validity would be the most important piece. But when considering validity in general, then content validity. So this is determined subjectively by a test administrator as to how well individual test items represent the course content. So the expert in that field would be able to tell you just by looking at it what if the test is actually testing what it's saying it will. So regardless of how reliable your test is, it won't matter if the questions that you include in the test are not really asking questions related to what you're trying to determine. So for example, if you have a VO2 max, if you have all these subjects completing a VO2 max, would you take the scores of a VO2 max to help you determine how well they're going to do, let's say, on a 1 repetition maximum bench press? No, they're two totally different things. The VO2 max is telling you aerobic capacity, so it'd be a good indicator of how well they're going to do, let's say, on a 5K race or on a 10K race. So those would be it would be able to predict a little bit better how they do in those performances. Last point here says item analysis can be used to help determine the quality of the overall tests, or it can also help us improve how we write our tests because we can find weaknesses through item analysis. Now, if you look on pages 174 and 175 of your textbook, it gives you step-by-step how to calculate item validity, item analysis. Now, I don't expect you guys to do this for any test or anything like that, but what is important to note is the percentage of the given tests that are used to calculate this. So if you look at step 3 on page 175, it says separate the answer sheets into 3 subgroups. So it tells you to find the highest scores, lowest scores, and the average scores. And it tells you the upper and lower scores should be 27% each. So 27% of the highest scores, 27% of the lowest scores. So in order to calculate this, the item analysis, it says you need those top and lower tiers, which account for, if you add 27 plus 27, that's 54%. So you would need 54% of all the tests you gave out in order to begin the analysis here. Next, in the item analysis, make sure you get to page 176 and look at the formulas 8.3 and 8.4 on that page. These are the equations for index of difficulty and index of discrimination. You'll need to know how to use these equations, so if you have any questions on that, let me know. But you basically plug in the numbers in the equation there, and you can find out if they were to give you some figures as far as like how many students took a test and how many were in the upper level and how many were in the lower tier of grading or of scoring, I'm sorry. Discussing the index of difficulty and index of discrimination, we have to understand that there is a relationship. And if you look on page 177, figure 8.4, we have a figure here that shows us that as the difficulty goes up, so it shows from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100%, the potential discrimination also goes up, but only to 50%. So let me back up here a little bit. When we talk about the index of discrimination, what we're really talking about is trying to make an item on a test so that it's difficult enough to where only the people that did well in the test will get the answer correct, meaning 50% of the people who are taking this test should get this test correctly, and the other half should not get it correctly. And this would be an ideal situation. So, and this is where we get this graph, that 50% of the people taking the test should be able to get this question correct, or that's the goal, essentially, when you're writing any question to a test. Now, in order for the question or the item of the test to have a good index of discrimination, it also needs to have a good index of difficulty, and that's where the graph shows us that as the difficulty goes up, so does the discrimination. But again, only to a certain point. Once that question begins to get too difficult, if it's um, only a 10% of the people get it correctly, then that means that the potential discrimination or the um, index of discrimination is going to start to decrease. Okay, so let me repeat that again. If a question has about half the people getting it correctly, then it has a good power of discrimination. And it would probably also have a good amount of difficulty, but not so difficult to where only a very small percentage of people are getting it correct. So that's a relationship between the index of difficulty and index of discrimination. Now, the opposite could also be said about a question, meaning if the same percentage of people who did well on the test as the percentage of people that did bad on the test got one question correct, then that would mean that question does not have good power of discrimination, because it's kind of leaving it up to chance. Like, it doesn't matter if you knew all the material well or if you did not know the material well for the whole test, you would still have a good chance of getting that one question on the test correct. So that would not have good power of discrimination. So here's the figure that I was talking about. And as you can see, as difficulty goes up, at least up to 50%, so does discrimination. And that's all I really wanted to go over. I think those were some of the harder concepts to understand in this chapter, but hopefully this helps you out a little bit. You're going to see a lot of this in your quiz, so make sure you review this. Make sure you're familiar with the terms that are written in this chapter. If you have any questions regarding Chapter 8, let me know, and I'll try to answer as best as possible, maybe give you guys some examples. All right, have a great week.